Just before we get started with today's video, I do want to say that it's brought to you by me. If you enjoy this sort of video, I think you'll enjoy my other channel called Business Blaze. It's about business, obviously, but it's fun. It looks at the most epic failures and times things went wrong, but also little-known successes generally. It's just the weirdest stuff that I could find from the business world, like the £50 note is for criminals in the UK and other stuff like that. It's a bit more laid back than this channel, so if you like a bit of silliness with your facts, definitely check it out, linked to below. Doom isn't so much a video game as it is a pop culture phenomenon, a media touchstone that is constantly ranked as one of the most influential games of all time. It's also awesome. A game so popular it spawned a host of copycat releases, kickstarted the FPS first-person shooter genre, and was at one point in history installed on more PCs worldwide than Windows 95? That's insane! According to the game's creators, though, it likely would have never existed as we know it if not for a game of Dungeons and Dragons that went horribly wrong. According to John Romero, one of the driving creative forces behind Doom and a notable figure in the gaming community, the genesis for the game can be traced back to the fall of 1992, specifically in the months following the release of Raid: Shadow Legends. Not really, it was following the release of Spear of Destiny, another video game worked on and developed by him and the team at ID Soft. Romero has since explained that initially Doom was supposed to be a game based on the Aliens franchise, of which many members of ID were fans. Although the team managed to bend the ear of a representative at 20th Century Fox who seemed excited about the idea of making a game using the Aliens license, they ultimately dropped out of the offer, citing a desire for total creative control. Following the breakdown of talks with Fox, another key figure in Doom history, John Carmack, made the suggestion that they do basically the same thing except with Hellspawn instead of aliens. This brings us back to a game of Dungeons and Dragons that the team had played one evening, in which through a confluence of horrifically botched dice rolls and poor planning, the game had ended when one team member accidentally opened a portal to hell, allowing demons to overrun the entire planet. Another influence was the horror film Evil Dead 2, of which the team were also fans. As for the name, according to Carmack, the idea came from a scene in the film The Color of Money, in which Tom Cruise plays a pool hustler. The scene features Cruise's character walking into a bar holding a case containing his pool cue, which piques the curiosity of another person in the scene who asks what it contains. Cruise's character responds with a sly smile and simply says, "Doom," before proceeding to utterly dominate every person in the bar at pool. That sounds like an epic scene. I've never seen the movie, but now I want to. Carmack enjoyed the scene and likens the resulting carnage from Cruise's cocky assurance that his case contains Doom to how the game would be seen by the gaming industry of the time. He was modest too. In any event, these ideas all greatly interested fellow ID Software employee Tom Hall, who, upon hearing all of this, immediately set out about creating what is now known as the Doom Bible. This legendary tome contained story details, monster sketches, and even a potential press release for the game as Hall envisioned it. The game's tagline? Well, that was Doom, where the sanest place is behind a trigger. Badass! Despite the substantial amount of work Hall put into creating the Bible, virtually nothing from it actually ended up being included in the final version of the game that we got to play. Apparently, sadly. The most commonly cited reason for why so few elements of the Doom Bible made it into the final product is that they were simply too elaborate for the type of action-oriented game that they were trying to make. For example, in Hall's initial treatment of the game, the story of Doom was meant to follow the journey of 5 soldiers on an alien world as they traveled to Hell and back in order to fight the demonic hordes of the underworld, and it featured a sprawling, long-winded plot. Now, I always skip the cutscenes in games, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't what happened. Carmack poo-pooed this idea, famously quipping, "Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important." And now I'm thinking they could have like cutscene skip for porn. You're welcome, the porn industry. I'll take my royalties by check. That said, several aspects of Hall's original idea did make it into the final game, albeit with some changes. For instance, Hall's original idea of having the game take place on an alien planet called Tay Tenga, and the idea of invading Hell in the latter half of the game, was liked by staff. It was ultimately, however, reworked to have the game be set on the twin moons of Mars, Phobos, and Deimos. And the plot point of having the player be stranded there by accident was dropped because Carmack didn't like the implied insinuation that the player character had to have sucked to end up stranded there. So, whoops, I'm on the moons of Mars. As such, it was reworked so that the player is specifically called to Mars's moon. Likewise, the staff liked the idea of playing as a Marine, but not the idea of playing as 4 different characters with their own personalities. So instead, the game was changed to focus around a single unnamed Marine, popularly nicknamed Doom Guy by fans. Very creative, guys. In regards to this specific change, Romero felt that it was especially important to never name the Marine you play as in Doom because, to quote him, it's supposed to be you. I think this was an epically right decision because playing Doom, like the original Doom, felt so lonely and scary. If you were there with, like, Comrade John, you'd be like, hell yeah! But no, you were just alone. God, that was scary. I was like 12. The game, however, was created from the ground up with the idea of being able to play it cooperatively or competitively via an internet or modem connection with other players. Another problem with Hall's treatment of Doom was his insistence on realism, which inadvertently ended up making the game less fun, in their opinion. For example, Hall extensively studied real-world military bases and designed several levels based on their specifications for missions of the game due to be set in a military space station. Though accurate, these levels were bland and ultimately dull to play, mostly consisting of square flat environments that didn't feature any of the usual geometry or textures that eventually made the game so iconic. Stupid real-life military bases. This difference in opinions and ideas ultimately saw Hall leave development of the game. Early in development, Doom was also supposed to feature an elaborate point-scoring system, as well as the ability to earn and lose lives, similar to many arcade games of the time. However, Romero didn't like this idea, as the thought of losing all your lives and thus your progress on a game you owned didn't appeal to him, and the concept of the game was focused to instead revolve entirely around a simple mantra: kill everything and get out alive. Moving on to the now iconic visual look of Doom, this was partially inspired by a number of sources, most notably the disturbing biomechanical artwork of H.R. Geiger, who is famous for his work on the Alien series. Also in the mix is the horrifying eldritch abominations inspired by the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. To round out the main inspirations, we also have the artwork of heavy metal album covers, which often feature hellish nightmarescapes like those found in the game's latter levels. All combined, this gave the world a rather unique, for the time, game aesthetic. Speaking of heavy metal, the game's soundtrack was directly influenced by this genre, so much so that the only real direction composer Bobby Prince got from Romero was being handed a stack of his favorite metal albums with the instruction to create something similar. Prince did exactly that with many of the game's tracks, featuring riffs that directly homage the work of heavy metal pioneers like Metallica, Slayer, and Pantera. As a humorous side note, sound effects for the game, and in particular the screams of the demonic enemies you fight a seemingly infinite number of, were partially supplied by Romero himself. You see, Romero was known to provide his own, often enthusiastic sound effects for monsters and enemies while playing early builds of the game, much to the amusement of co-workers who'd frequently stop working to watch, or more accurately, listen to him play the game. That's amazing. Interestingly, some of the enemies found in Doom, such as the Cyber Demon and Baron of Hell, were actually clay figurines that were then scanned into a computer and then digitized using a custom piece of software designed by Carmack called the Fuzzy Pumper Palette Shop. Similarly, the sprites used for some of the game's weapons, like the shotgun and pistol, were based on photos taken of toys bought at a local Toys R Us that were then digitized. Toys R Us, the place I go to make my next 18-rated game. Despite looking dated today, at the time of the release of Doom, it was considered a technological milestone, featuring things that were previously mostly unheard of in video games, such as ambient lighting, stereo sound effects, and realistic-looking 3D environments. Even things like stairs and having rooms of varying height was considered groundbreaking at the time. Completed in just over a year, the game notably never initially received a wide commercial release, being instead sold via mail order and even offered for free via download on various websites. And I don't know why this is coming to my head right now, but I can absolutely still remember the cheat code for the all weapons pack on the original Doom game for PlayStation 1, X triangle L1 up down R2 left left. Yes. On top of this, ID Software, I don't know why I brought that up, I'm sorry, let's carry on. On top of that, ID Software not only allowed people to share the game with one another without paying for it, but openly encouraged the practice to bolster the size of their fan base. For further promotion, prior to its release, Doom was the subject of much conversation on the early 1990s internet, and the developers often stoked the fires of interest with press releases saying things like, Doom is going to be like Wolfenstein times a million, and we expect Doom to be the #1 core cause of decreased productivity in businesses around the world. These guys, hype machines. In regards to the latter, despite the comment's tongue-in-cheek nature, it actually came true, with many businesses around the world having to ban Doom from their offices to stop people playing it and hogging the lines, so to speak, of their networks. Remember, this was a time when not everyone had access to the interwebs, let alone the types of high-speed connections that we have today. On top of company banning, some antivirus software makers even began including features specifically designed to stop people from playing Doom on their computers, which worked just about as well as you would expect. Doom was so popular that in 1995, that even following a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign from Microsoft, the game was still installed on more systems than Microsoft's groundbreaking new operating system, Windows 95. Not too shabby for the team at ID Software, which then comprised just 12 people, with the team who made Doom numbering just 6. And by the way, personal book recommendation, this isn't sponsored by Audible or anything, but it should be. There's an incredible book called Masters of Doom, which talks about the Romero-Carmack relationship and their building of Doom and all of this stuff. It's been years since I listened to it, but it's narrated by Will Wheaton, the guy who plays Wesley Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation, which is also epic. And personal aside, when I would pause the audiobook on my Audible app, I would often just say, "Shut up, Wesley," to myself and then put it down. Yes, personal anecdote over, video over. I do hope you enjoyed it. Smash that like button if you did. Do subscribe, check out Business Blaze. It's like this channel, just more fully laid back. It's linked to below. Thank you for watching.